Welcome to Urban Policy Analysis, folks. I'm Terry Clark. We have the syllabus online. Many people are just getting started. We're still checking about a possible teaching assistant. We have encouragement for keeping us safe and healthy. So we have the windows open, we have two little fans, and we have masks which we recommend at least the first day when we got more people here. And we've been traveling, and so we'll pass some of these around. And you're welcome to use one if you like through the course, and maybe the first couple of days when it's just pass it around. When we have more people, we usually, as you may have seen or heard, we're popular because you don't have to come to class if you don't want to. You can see the YouTube videos. You can stay healthy running up the lakefront or swimming in Southern California or whatever. But we encourage participation in any way you want, which doesn't have to be in class, although talking here is great. Other ways are posting stuff online with the we encourage everyone right the first day. What if you would just use a mask and then take it off if you're chatting? How's that? He's got a mask. He's got a mask. Just for the others, encouragement. This is a fun course. It's about fun stuff, and I'm going to show you. Say, is this course about what we have here? Whoops, about fun back here, folks. There we go. Now I'm going to turn this horizontally. How many of you have ever been to Lollapalooza? How many of you came to the university in order to be able to go to Lollapalooza? Okay, that's the challenging question. If this is urban policy analysis, if you're the mayor, these mayors have said, we used to do hogs. We used to do financial futures. We used to do industry. What's the main industrial base of Chicago today? You go to City Hall. Entertainment. This is the driver of Chicago's transformation. It's a hugely different. This is not Al Capone City anymore in that way. It's no longer Mayor Daley One machine. This is what has been the driver for a number of years. But let's just put on a little bit, because most students here have never been to Chicago before. Last years, this was 500,000 people. Major driver of people come here during the summer. When they're in college, they heard about having fun. They go to nightclubs. They get a feel of the place. If you compare cities across the U.S., metro areas, the biggest metro areas in all big and small, which have had the largest absolute numbers of increases of young people? I think it's 25 to 34, maybe it's, yeah, maybe it's 18 to 34, whatever. 4 Mile downtown area, that is not the whole area, but the 4 Mile downtown area compared to the rest of the area, what's the number one growth in young people in the United States? LA? Somewhere in Miami? Chicago? Chicago's attracting more young people like you, your age, roughly. Okay. Not rich and poor. It's not just the elite. It's not just the University of Chicago. Young people with multiple educational levels, etc. Okay. Why? How could this be happening? Why is this such an attractive city? And how can entertainment be the driver of economic development? When I've said this before in class, a number of people have said, you know, you're saying that this is economics. This is economics. That's it. This is the new economics. That's the point of the course. Okay. So that's what we will do. Basically, is go through 5 main theories of where and why economic policies and urban development works. And most of those are getting weaker and others are getting stronger. But where and why differs by city and by neighborhood. That is, we don't have this kind of band in every neighborhood in Chicago. I live in Bronzeville. Bronzeville's, you know, everybody is black except for me. Okay, and I go to civic activity meetings. I know that I worked with the alderman. Former alderman was Tony Preckwinkle, was a student of mine here. She's now president of the Cook County Board. We've got students, former students, working all over the city. They come back and say, hey, you know, we need help on this. And so we said, oh, we talk to students here. We have an internship of a smart USC student, and we connect with policies that are being made here. Then we have people now who've done this from China, and they say, yeah, I'm going back to China, and then 3 of them started a scenes academy in China, and that was about eight so years ago. We started having meetings in a little room like this. Now it's online. How many people connected to this last December? 1.4 million. We are very popular in China. The idea is not me, it is scenes. The scenes idea is not just one singer, not just one show, not just one stage. It's the scene of Chicago, the scene of that band, and Lollapalooza as an event. And so we've got more here where there are interviews with people. You know, what are you coming? There were people here camping out, sleeping to get the first row seats of that performance. They wanted to be. Their interviewer, you know, from TV was saying, "How come you're here? You know, at 6 a.m. How come you're sitting here? It doesn't start for hours." I'd love to get a first row seat. Okay, this is charisma. It's Mac's favorite talk about it. Okay, so where can you use charisma as a concept, social science concept, to link with economic development, to link with migration, to link with economic investment, economic dollars, investment, what makes the whole machine work? One is in a book called The City is an Entertainment Machine. New alternatives. Okay. That's I would say that's the brief introduction to why this course is a lot of fun and very different from what it used to be in this city. When I first came here, this was a dirty, dangerous, unfun city. I spent summers in Paris, Washington, New York, Italy, and so forth. I didn't spend the summer here. I now spend the summer all the time. It's fantastic. The city has deeply changed. So how city changed so much. That's worth studying. People are learning in China of how to follow Chicago. We have the new Chicago school, how to do this. And that's what the 1.4 million are about. We're bringing out a new book in Chinese first. Later on it will be in English. But it's about scenes in the new Chicago school. They wanted it because they teach the old Chicago school they used to in China and everywhere else. 1920 Chicago. Urban sociology was invented here. But what that meant in the 1920s and 30s was ecology, competition, invasion, succession, concepts that came from Darwin. People didn't have any culture in their heads. They didn't have any music. They didn't have any religion. They were just like animals. So Darwin was not written for people, it was for animals. So competition, domination, etc. Those are concepts which are there. They're still there. You can still try. And that's what they still teach in some of the places. But the new Chicago school says, add culture, add people, add fun, add entertainment. And which specific dimensions? We have 15 dimensions of scenes such as transgression, charisma, neighborliness, localism, glamour. These kinds of things we've measured for every zip code in the US, and we've done that in Korea, Japan, China, Spain, Portugal, France, and we've got tons of data. You could use it in doing a paper if you want. Okay, so we have millions of dollars worth of data collected by these teams, but because they're the national governments, that's in part why China was there. The national government, they have a 5-year plan. Socialism, 5-year plan, government. What did they do? I think it was two or 3 years ago. They said, we're going to take out the growth plan. This is what the Wall Street Journal always focuses on. What's the Chinese economic growth plan? 8%. Oh, it's only 8%, down from 2% the year before. So what the Chinese did was to drop that 8%, say, we're not going to publish any goals at all. What did they put in instead? 5 places, scenes. Economic development scenes, entertainment scenes, housing scenes, migration scenes. And that's why the 1.4 million are there, because they're doing it. Beijing, etc. They're transforming China, building a more, and you don't read about this. I'm saying just for a sentence or two, because you don't read about this in the Western press. If you find a translation from something in China, this is what the people in China care about. They don't care about fighting with Americans, whatever. That is domestic politics. Is vacation, having fun, having concerts. It's the same here, much more than you don't get in most of the Western press. Okay, so where and why these transformations in the direction of entertainment, consumption, that is, the old goal was 8% of production, of making more money, making more widgets, making more cars, and so forth. Yes, and the same thing was done by the Chicago Board of Economic Leadership, what's called the main economic planning agency in the U.S., or the counterpart. I went to one of their meetings, and all they talked about was growth, growth, growth. We have more factories, we have steel factories. They're sort of going down. Steel ain't so good anymore. But it used to be, and we need to think about that more, they would say. So I talked to the director, and I said, you don't see a thing about consumption in Chicago. How about Lollapalooza? Oh yeah, they didn't study that. So we had a conference, Ed Glazer and I. Ed Glazer's he's the top urban economist. He's trained here. He's now at Harvard. And we put on a 2-day session with 80 top economists, invited. It's the Federal Reserve Bank, Chicago. And at the beginning, nobody paid attention when I said something like this. And by the end of the day, I would say, arguing, I mean, you know, PhDs, economists, these are smart people, fighting, arguing back and forth. At the end of the day, I'd say 1/3 were really buying these arguments, 1/3 were unsure, and 1/3 were still fighting. Okay. In one day, that's pretty good. So you're going to get more than a day. We're not saying there's only entertainment. Of course, people need jobs. They want daycare. They want jails. All these things are there in cities. But where and why, whether do they grow or not, and how does that work? Okay, that's what we're going to deal with in the course. It deals with key concepts and findings from urban sociology, urban politics, parts of urban economics, geography. The news is that there's lots of lively debate of what drives cities, and several new theories seriously question much of what the past theories proposed. And the first half of the course is what we really focus on, these 5 main theories. The second half, after the exam, will be more policy oriented on specifics. If you're doing I have a special interest in any one of these, it doesn't have to be a big paper. Most people just take 2 exams and that's fine, midterm and final, and that's fine. If anybody wants to do a little bit more, or especially if you're doing a BA and MA thesis, thinking about something like that, you can go to Lollapalooza and interview people. You can look at the Federal Reserve Bank data. You can look at the Chinese. We published a book that was in China. I don't see any Chinese-looking faces, but there may be people. But we have about half. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And so we're about half the classes registered with 20 people. So they know already. You don't have to come here at all. They're not here the first day. Usually people come the first day, but these people half of you are still in Santa Monica or wherever. Okay. General. I'll mention one more in terms of moving away from the old Chicago school. There was a group called a group met outside LA, and they created what they said the LA school, and they published a book, and on the front page was a sign which is in downtown Chicago which says, LA, arrow. Route 66, and the old Route 66 would go from downtown Chicago right to LA. Okay, so their idea was that the ideas of how cities work are no longer the old Chicago school. Okay, I agree with that. The old Chicago school, as I mentioned with Darwin, doesn't work anymore. It's not. It's yes, those concepts can still be used, but they're not very helpful compared to the other things which you also need. The LA school said that, and so they said, the future is LA. The future is suburbs. The future is housing in little in something, and then behind that they said movies, films. Okay, that's the idea. Now we're getting closer. Films are more important than just density. Okay. But the point is, then that became, and we had a conference in Chicago because there was another guy who taught it at UCLA, but he also lived and he now teaches at Columbia in New York. So we have the LA school, the New York school, and the Chicago school. And the LA background with the films, if you're trying to say, is there any content for theory? I mean, what makes this, why are the films central? So there's this sort of fun version of Marxism. And that's in New York and Paris. they use a little more, slightly more serious Karl Marx, not just Groucho Marx, but also Karl Marx some of the time. And so the LA, so these three cities are important in the U.S. internationally. What matters are the bigger ideas. And so Marx is clearly there. Marx is we'll see in each of the sections, there are Marxist themes there, but each of the Marxists need to be compared and used and adapted to be updated. So I'm mentioning the three schools, and that they're continuing, and that's part of the fun. In each of the 5 sections, you will see battles between different people saying, no, it's not this way, and so then they have some kind of either one case study, or they have fancy statistical analysis, and they try to say the other theory is wrong. Okay, this is going on right now, and it's happening in the journals, it's happening in books, it's happening in all the conferences. We had a conference in Chicago. I think it was the American Political Science Association, maybe it was the American Planning Association. Anyway, one of the lead speaker of the LA school stood up and said, you know, this is Chicago, but this is the old Chicago school, and it's dead. And so he went on, and then there were 7 people who were co-authors in the book on the LA school, and they started shouting with him and against him, saying, no, you got it wrong. So the LA school is not a school. They fight each other within. Now, we disagree among the Chicagoans, but at least in terms of, that is, they focus narrowly on density, as I mentioned, a crude economic determinism. We include economics is clearly there, but we also have politics and culture and entertainment, and we pay attention to these and where and how they work. And so choosing and looking for variables, including new things, and then assessing with serious data that we can, as good as we can find, many different kinds. We use, as you'll see in the course, many kinds of methods, case studies, ethnographic, personalistic, biographies, novels. We'll also use econometrics and classic statistical analysis. Okay, all of these are each has its strengths, each has its weaknesses. We try to use multiple approaches in terms of methodology and data sources, and then we try explicitly to compare cities. Why is Chicago different from LA, and which neighborhood? If we drill down further, because Chicago, I mean, any city like this is huge. The neighborhoods are very different. I taught at UCLA because I wanted to try to see where was so different. And I'd done a marathon here, so I trained for the marathon. I ran in a different neighborhood for the whole fall, and there were things like in Koreatown, you'd be running along, it would say, sign English here, English spoken. And you could go for 30 blocks. Everything was in Korean. So they've got big differences. Hollywood, I wrote with the leading UCLA ethnographer. He teaches ethnography, and he lives in Hollywood. I said, let's just ride around the whole day in Hollywood. So we did, and I learned then something like 28% of the residents of Hollywood are in income below poverty. I said, really? I said, yeah. These people own buildings. There are a number of Orthodox Jews who have big buildings. They break them up into little apartments, and they rent them out way below what you can find in the rest of LA. That's Hollywood. I didn't know that. Okay. They also have signs at night, or they have what do you call it, metal covers on the shop windows. In LA, they didn't just have black stuff on it with nothing on it. They had Marilyn Monroe. They had John Wayne. They had actors. Famous films were right there at night. That's a good idea. So I took it it back to Chicago. We talked about it in Bronzeville. People in Bronzeville then said, hey, let's get, so one, they hired a guy who was Mexican, who knew about graffiti, and he hired, or they found something like 10 young high school black kids in Bronzeville, and they went to all the shops and they said, you know, do you want to have something on your, you know, in front of your shop, so at night people will know this is a fun place to come. I said, yeah. So you got streets around Bronzeville inspired by Hollywood and one bike tour. Okay, that's an example of how this grows out of, the scenes grows out of 20 years what we call fiscal austerity and urban innovation. Okay. Urban innovation is painting signs, doing things differently. And that's one of the themes of urban innovation is one of the 5 theories. Okay, so let me run through a little bit more of these, but let me stop for a second first. If anybody has any questions or quick reactions or challenging questions, that would be great. Let's just run around. Which cities are you from? Just mention the city you're from.
Yeah, I'm from like right outside LA.
What's the name of the town?
I'm from Whittier. It's like 30 minutes straight east.
Okay, great.
I'm from Dublin, Ireland.
Just a little louder.
Dublin, Ireland.
Dublin. There we go. James Joyce. Here's here in the slides. Yeah, you read Ulysses?
I've read bits of it.
Okay, that's enough. You are. That's great.
I'm from downtown Chicago.
Okay.
I'm from Palo Alto, California.
Palo Alto.
Fremont, California.
Which town?
Fremont.
Fremont. Okay.
Madison, Wisconsin.
Okay.
From Orange County, California.
Okay.
Dallas, Texas.
There we go.
London, England.
All right. Terrific. Which neighborhood?
Just south, so like Croydon, Biggin.
Okay. Terrific. So I mean, this is great. So you know, Dublin, London, New York, and a lot of LA. Okay, so my comments about LA are not far from what your background has at least been going on. Maybe you haven't heard about these kind of debates among the LA folks, but it was fun. and I mean, LA is a great city for sure, but they didn't necessarily have the right reasons for it. Okay, so that is the quick answer I would say is people ask me all the time, where would you like, what's the best city you'd like to live in and why? My answer is every city has got some interesting things to it. And if you look, when I first came to Chicago, I hated Chicago. But it changed. And there are new kinds of people here. And the combinations and the contrasts, that makes it complicated and interesting. Okay. And if you look closely, in Dublin, in London, in Dallas, we can find many of these same things. But they may be bigger in Dallas and smaller, other things may be smaller in London and so forth. Okay. In James Joyce's book, Ulysses, what's the driver of the economy of Dublin?
I've only read like the first chapter, and it was for my degree, so
Okay.
I don't know in great
Okay, in
detail.
the first chapter, what would be the driver?
In the first chapter, is it not just the guy like in his apartment?
Yeah.
I mean, they're
But
students.
there are 2 people, and one goes to work, and he's a teacher. Stephen Daedalus. He's one of the speakers of the book. And so he's fighting about. He hates the English, but nevertheless there was this guy named Shakespeare. So where and why Shakespeare we still pay attention. So that kind of stuff is there, but there's another chapter about clergymen, another chapter by an undertaker. And where and why these things fit together and why is what the same kind of questions which we're going to ask and look at in the course. Okay, so my point is, you can use novels, you can use films as raw data that can be very useful. And these people like James Joyce, Faulkner, John Wayne, these are smart people. They see things about cities that didn't get written about by Darwin. So we can use multiple sources, and you'll see in the readings. Okay. I'll just mention his background before we get to these five big theories. The big idea that was in economics, geography, sociology was called central place theory. And von Thunen in Germany, and then Burgess here in Chicago, was zones, that you had concentric circles, and that these concentric circles had different functions, different economic activities, and that the value of land was the most valuable at the center. And as you went further out, it generally went down, but it was a normal, kind of a normal curve, statistical normal curve in general. And it was driven by downtown business, which requires face-to-face contact. This was before the telephone, before the internet, before cell phones, etc. Land value declines in the cities you move out from the center. This has been shown to weaken every decade from the late 19th century to near present, by Brian J. L. Berry, who was one of the top geographers here when I first came. And he showed, that was a good theory in the 19th century. It ain't much anymore. So if we then look for things that became more important, in a sense that's before these five. One of the leaders is called regimes, or leadership, or the elite. This is sometimes called community power structure. Floyd Hunter gave it that term, and it was drawn on the Atlanta example of the business elite, and capitalism was seen to be the driver. He said privately and in conferences that he was a Stalinist Marxist, and that this is really explains what happens to cities. Along came another guy in New Haven, Robert Dahl, who said, "This is silly. Politics really matters. Let's analyze and show it." So he did a brilliant book, which is on our reading list, called Who Governs? And so where and why these two interpretations fought each other for decades. And if you look, it's still going on. Latin America, Eastern Europe, they're still fighting about this. Is it capitalism? Is it business elites that really drive everything? Or is it something about politics? Or is it something, where and how do economic decisions get linked with political leadership? Okay, this was in papers by Judd and Parkinson and Clark and Ferguson on city money. I won't try to get to results so much as to say one example later in the reading list is Molich and Logan's book, and Clarence Stone. These still continue a strong business interpretation and a Marxist framework for Molich and Logan when they wrote the book. 10 years later, they gave up that theory, but they wrote a new introduction, and they said, oh yeah, there's now entertainment, there's new consumption, we ought to pay attention to these, but he didn't change the book itself. So if you read the preface sort of implies this book is going to tell you that, but the book says the opposite of what so I'm pointing out even the same people change these different theories, and don't that is, I would say, rather than saying it's all me, I'm always smart and I'm always telling you the true thing. Cities change. neighborhoods change, and our theories should change if we're going to capture what's really happening. Okay. Second big theory, markets, right out of USC economics. Adam Smith. At the urban level, Paul Peterson makes the argument that competition among cities, which is competition not for investment, for migration, but also for grants from national governments, which is more political, from which shows, which restaurants will come here. How much has London changed since Brexit?
Quite a bit.
Sorry?
Quite a bit.
Quite a bit. Give us 2 sentences. Is it as much fun and lively and cutting edge globally as it was before Brexit? No? But go ahead.
I'd probably say it's going down a bit. And I don't know, probably like financial services used to be the big guys. I don't know.
Okay, so that is, I mean, this may be especially true of the financial services neighborhood and of banks and those comments. Some of those people just left immediately as soon as the election was, the Brexit vote was over. Lots of these closed their banks. The people moved out. They went elsewhere. But more slowly, the hot nightclubs, the restaurants, the food, those have been more slow. But the point is, these things change in part because of global competition. And some of that, maybe in terms of Brexit, that was really a national. So let me add another concept. The level is important to be explicit about it, but it's not that we should expect all of the variation to be generated at one level. You've got, in the case of Brexit, this was a national government policy decision, and it had really become framed as almost, it wasn't a referendum, but it was basically it was close to that in the sense, should we really participate with the EU or should we get out? And they said, we'll get out. Okay, so the point is the international linkage. Saskia Sassen is another person who's written, and I taught courses, she was here. I taught courses both with Peterson and both with and Saskia Sassen when they were here. We wrote books together and we argued with each other and so forth. So Peterson basically was saying cities are working, cities are markets, they're market participants and so forth. And he was political science. Within political science was then very hot, and it was called public choice. Public choice was Adam Smith. It's old style economics being updated in part by Buchanan and Tulloch, the social choice, public choice kinds of folks. Sassen made a similar argument, but it was global. So her model was Wall Street. The driver was not the fact that it's one street in New York, but the fact that it was, and they were paid more because they were linked with global firms. So you could have a law firm or an accounting firm with 4,000 people, and many of them will be in Australia and South Africa, etc. And therefore, you could go and work with them, and that would lead to global economic decision-making, driving up the economy and driving up Wall Street and New York. So she contrasted this with New York, Tokyo, and London. And so that these were global cities, and it was the global part of the economy that really was the driver. Okay, and we had people in the class who would come to the seminar, people, especially some of the English, would come and say, with globalization, national statistics are dead. Talk about the GNP, doesn't matter anymore. You can't compute GNP anymore. These concepts of educate, etc. So all of social science should be washed out. People said that. I said, really? And so I started, later on, I started another course, which is in the winters, I still teach now. It's called Global Local Politics. So for sure, global factors do matter, but they don't explain everything. The point is so the way we set up the course in the winter is to say we go through institutions. So we have elections, we have budgets, local budgets, we have markets, we have neighborhood migration. That is, we have local processes. And so we then look at it and see, let's look at where and why and how much the global processes transform the local dynamics. And there's a new body of work which does this. So my point is, we will examine in this course global briefly, national in terms of Peterson and other things, local at the city level, but we also go down to the neighborhood levels because we get more extreme versions. So I live in Bronzeville because it's an extreme version of Black Power. It's Bronzeville and Harlem are the two national centers of Black culture in the U.S., and that's hot stuff. If you look at the Italian Donna, look at women's style magazines in Italy, and who are the models? They're from Bronzeville. They're black, men and women. Not all of them, but a lot of them. That's a revolution from 20 years ago. Okay, so the third big idea is political culture, and I'll just give you an example of Daniel Elazar has 3 streams of political culture that people came, that is, except for the so-called Eskimos and Indians, were immigrants. New Englanders were Calvinists predominantly. Little churches, and religion was what drove them to leave England and to create their church, and they were heavily informed by religion. Salem, Massachusetts has been studied for this more than anyone else. But it was studied and also deeply criticized in novels. By its puritanical side. The middle Atlantic side, political culture, was Wall Street. Competition, markets. New Amsterdam is where they started the stock market. London then went after that, and then here. But the Dutch were really entrepreneurial. They also had Calvinism, so we had the combination of those two for part of it. But the Middle Atlantic, and so then there was a migration westward, and people who went from those states across included Middle Atlantic states, more or less west of there. So this is it could get over to San Francisco. But north of that, up in Minneapolis or in Portland, Oregon, you find New England political culture. In Southern California, you've got aspects of the South. And the South came from Texas, Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama. And those 3 political cultures are still fighting each other for president of the United States right now. Where does Trump live? From New York, he went to Florida. He doesn't live in Portland, Oregon, or New England. Okay. And look at the votes. I'll leave that for now and simply say that what's the political culture? It's sort of the feel for the place. What makes its underlying values, conceptions of what's right or wrong, and that the simplest example, if you will, is the church and puritanical in Salem, Massachusetts, the Wall Street entrepreneurship and competition, trading money, but also votes in that way, and seen that as legitimate. In the South, the tradition was slavery, driving at least the traditional foundation of the economy, as well as not just the economy, but the conception of hierarchy and honor, dissing. If you diss somebody in Chicago, you know, these days, you put it up on a website, you let us have it, you're going to get it. And they kill people. There's a book by an assistant professor in sociology. I ride bikes a lot. And his book is called The Ballad of the Bullet. That's what the book's about. Okay, fourth theory, innovation. Richard Florida is maybe his name, but the ideas come back from the economist Schumpeter, from Jane Jacobs, Ed Glazer. Innovation and entrepreneurship is the key driver of the economy of cities, and so Jane Jacobs was a famous, and then Glazer and the others will cite her book. Even though she wasn't trained as an economist, she said the drivers of cities were new ideas, and those new ideas in turn attract smart young people, and they in turn build new economies. Okay, so and for sure that's happening. You're here. What brought you here? You could get given the test scores and so forth today, you are roughly the same in overall quality as Harvard, Yale, Princeton. How are we different? We have a different political culture than Harvard, Yale, and Princeton. Harvard, Yale, Princeton. They had no research in the 19th century. Affluent business folks, and they then, if they were hired by their parents or by friends, whatever, they could work on Wall Street and make a lot of money, and they would contribute more to Harvard and Yale, which has a bigger endowment. But here we had artists, teachers, clergymen, revolutionaries, political activists. Ideas were big stuff at the UC. And this was and today, this has more Nobel Prize winners than any other university in the world. So if you want ideas, don't just look for the clubs or which were written about in traditional Yale lifestyle. My father's grandfather and uncles, they all went to Yale. My father never was going to go to Yale. Never did. Etc. Okay, that is this sense of different. You got a PhD in Chicago. So Florida, innovation, entrepreneurship. 4 theories. 5th theory, arts, consumption, leisure, the interpenetration of play and work, high and low culture, all sorts of things morph together in ways that the past have largely been left to specialists. And then an aspect of this is the scene. So I mentioned briefly the Academy in China of studying music, lifestyle, and we published a book in one case study, Sept30, which has more visitors during the spring festival, 2 weeks or so in February. Has a growth rate like this and a higher number of visitors. Even under COVID, visitors went there from all over China to this one city, much more than to Beijing or any other city in China. Okay, so these kinds of things, is this capitalism? Competition, yes. The scene is a concept for asking where and how these things fit together. It builds in part on the the economists here, Gary Becker did his PhD on education, which he called human capital. The next step was to go beyond human capital, was to go to consumption and aesthetics, measured by what's an aesthetic? A mountain, a beach, a movie house, a concert downtown. These amenities, how can we measure these things, which are defined by economists as non-market goods? You don't buy and sell them. So that is, if I say the concert, if it's, I should say literally, we can say a free concert. Some of them are free. And so people can go there if you don't pay anything. How can you measure? So the economists have been playing with building theories of where and how to measure and analyze and make more sense of. But they're normal. They started with one amenity, such as a concert or concerts, or say films or film studios. When I came along and said, "Hey, I know," and I worked with them. I co-taught a course with urban economics and George Tully, and I went to workshops with Becker and the others. I used to run with Gary Becker, and then I said, Gary, you're doing sociology. Why don't you become professor of sociology and economics? And he did. So he was professor of sociology for about 30 years. And I'm simply saying the economics department today is drastically different. So the city is different. This economics department is totally different from the Milton Friedman and George Stickler of the 1960s. Okay. And the new economists are doing things like freakonomics. Okay. Taken together, we have drastically new ideas about economic development and policies. The old themes of capitalism, class conflict, race, class and gender, business dominance are not ignored but are reshaped, transformed by these new themes. Do all of these matter? Yes. All of these matter somewhat, and certainly in the past, and certainly in some neighborhoods, some cities, some neighborhoods, and more in some countries. But when we get to as big as a country, we're aggregate so much garbage going on. The reason I study cities is not because cities are more important. Cities are like little animals we can study to understand bigger processes as well. And we can find more extreme cases like Hollywood or Hyde Park versus Lincoln Park and so forth in different neighborhoods. Madison. One of these from Madison. Okay. College towns are not bad because they're distinct, but they are distinct, and where and why we can find things that begin with them. Okay. Recent farm migrants from Mexico are closer to the classical Padroni and clientelism. Mayor Daley 1 and Mayor Daley 2. Mayor Daley 2 had a section called the Hispanic Party. I think it was called the Hispanic Democratic Party. That is, instead of calling it the Democratic Party, he called it Hispanic. And it was Daley, and so he fought with he didn't have as a support. He didn't have support from the machine, the traditional machine that backed his father. So Daley too created his own little machine and didn't talk about it very much. But he publicly said, "I'm following Harold Washington, the black mayor." Harold Washington drastically changed the political culture of Chicago. Daley 1 was asked. Chicago Tribune reports it. Why'd you give those classic insurance firms from the city government's money to your son's firm? You're just giving to your sons. You heard this in Washington with Donald Trump. What did Daley 1 say? It's a father's duty to help his sons. Classic political culture of Daley 1. in Chicago? What did Harold Washington know? When we found that, you know, someone working for the city of Chicago was taking bribes. Harold Washington, you're the mayor. What are you going to do about this? I will fire him and prosecute him to the full extent of the law. That was a deep change in the political culture. And that kind of battle is going on today in Beijing, in London, and New York. Yeah, New York right now, this week. The mayor of New York is being prosecuted by the federal government. Okay, so these things are not just one city. Entertainment, new rules of the game, fighting consumption, and adding consumption and fighting corruption as the label for this is the hottest thing happening all around the world. It's not dropping hydrogen bombs or fighting just violence in that sense. We'll have a bike ride. Okay, I'm going to lead for you. Let's just have a discussion. But I'll just mention we have a bike ride this coming weekend on Saturday. Look, if you want, I started it decades ago. We bike around and go to the different neighborhoods, and we now then do it with John Boyers, former dean of the college, and Mark Hansen, who was dean of social science. And we each have 3 different views. We disagree. But we talk to you and say, here's why this is important. So we talk about the stockyards, Mayor Daley one's house. Mayor Daley too was born there, was also brought up there, etc. And Jesse Jackson's, Martin Luther King, etc. It's listed under Chicago Studies. It's a program within the college, and it puts on a bunch of I started these things, and I tried to look for this 2 or 3 years ago. There are now dozens of these things, which are urban walks, urban bike rides, and so forth, which have followed the same idea, and they now are happy to say that something like 1/3 or more of the college students have done some of these walks or bike rides. It's a great way to see some of the same things we're talking about. We will use, I'll just mention as well, the places I know more personally: Chicago, Paris, Yugoslavia a little bit, and then China. So we'll have examples from them, but we'll use international. We'll use all different kinds of. Where there's been a good research or policy study, we'll use or strong policy like Brexit. There's a major policy change. We'll talk about things like that and try to use that. Sometimes then we'll also, I'll just say, I try not to say anything is right or wrong, good or bad. I leave that to you. Bring your values are yours. I don't have that strongly. I mean, I grew up in many different parts of the country, internationally. I lived in Paris, lived in LA, and so forth growing up. As I've said, any city, any town, any village is interesting if you look closely. And genuinely, that's how I feel about this. But I would say what we would sometimes have done was say, what would Trump say, or what would Hillary Clinton say, what would Black Lives Matter say, and what would one of the Middle Eastern, groups like the Palestinians, might their perspective have been on this issue? So we'll try to. That is what I'm trying to say. We don't leave values out. We don't leave ideology out. But let's try to bring it in and let's talk about it explicitly and look for people who are leaders of it, not saying, whatever you like or dislike. The question is, what does that kind of ideology connect to in terms of policies? And so where and how do traditional policies get shifted? So these we'll talk, and that's part of political culture. Okay, let me stop as I've given you an overview, and let's have more. Joe. little discussion on any of this you're interested in. Yeah, I'll put up a little map of the, just a framework, just so it's an analytical framework, which I'm drawing from, here this is. Okay, here we go. Turn this sideways. All right, so factors driving for the new political culture. These are the analytical piece. This is from, it's in a couple of books in the course, but this is from the Seedscapes book. We have, whoops. Come on, guys. This is the Seedscapes book in Chinese. These are some of the scenes people, participants, who've been active. Dan Silver's the red shirt. He's co-author, senior author of the book. She worked in Poland, and he worked in Paris. He's the leading Spanish. Kiji, major participant from Beijing. Okay, now here's this is our extension of what Gary Becker did. So we have classic factors of production. This is Alfred Marshall. Gary Becker added human capital, so that human capital will make economic growth more efficient, and that will attract jobs in that traditional way of the 19th century, the late 20th century with human capital. And what we add now is amenities. These urban amenities attracts talent. So you here came to Chicago in part because of the university. That's the amenity. And that in turn, and you're the human capital, you in turn can make more economic growth if you move to work for a bank, work for a concert company, and all of these can bring people to Chicago, and the young people are migrating to Chicago, illustrating that pattern. So it's not as if, so all of these are correct. All of these hold, they still do. But the content of what kind of economic growth and the kinds of criteria are changing. And they change why? Because people change. And people want different things now than they wanted in 1900. Okay, that's the idea of scenes. And so these were, at this presentation actually I used three economists just to show some of this. So Schumpeter, Gary Becker, and Kuznets, who really invented that. Kuznets in the 1930s, when Keynes wrote, how did they measure GNP? Anybody know? You got some economic majors here? How did they measure GNP in the 1930s? They didn't. There was zero. There were no data in the 1930s. Kuznets invented it. He came here from Russia. He did this for his PhD in a small town near Ukraine, and he's now a professor. Was at Harvard. Okay, so etc. Utility is income plus amenities, and so Gary will say basically, amenities are more important for cities than market goods, not just material goods. Also, the music, the fun, the charisma. There's a huge rise in the arts that we will see. There's other people. So Paul has us how to measure this kind of stuff. Claude Lévi-Strauss, we'll see later on, Benjamin. But here's the analytical framework. So we have economic factors, social factors, leading, and government. There's three big. Third one down below is cultural factors. All of these have changes within these boxes. We're going to see some readings that fit into each of these. So my point is, this is multi-causal. There's not any one of these that drives everything. All of these are important. And if you try to simplify, you're going to be, that is, you can assume it caters paribus. If everything else were equal, then this one variable would matter. But what we do, which is originally was seen, is not try to analyze one amenity, but we use thousands of them. And we put together thousands, or either hundreds or maybe thousands. And then we can say, how many do we have in Paris, in London, and how are they different? And then we count them. How many restaurants have you got in London? How many have gone up or down since Brexit and so forth? Cafes are exploded. They didn't have any cafes in China. They didn't have any cafes in Seoul 30 years ago. They think the cafes came from Starbucks. They don't even know about Paris or London, or so it's really Paris or Italy. In England, they have. That's another. I won't go into much detail. These are the framework and the example of Kuznets as well as Lollapalooza. Reactions. When I first came here, the faculty could never get anything in. Students wanted to talk more than we did. Now it's hard to get people to talk. You've got a lot of stuff going in your heads. You're smarter than they were 30 years ago, but you don't talk as much. You can talk. You are. And that is the important thing. I listen. I want to learn. I want to listen. I want to learn from you. I try to learn in each class, and I do. And all of you can and will. Go ahead.
So,
Dallas.
Yeah, that's actually part of my question is like when we went around and said we were from, like some of your response was silent or it was like over it. Like what metrics do you look at and say over it, like the double and the outs that make you say that?
When for 5 years from I was about 8 to 12, 8 to 13, when I was around 11, I was in a sandbox with two other guys who lived across the street. And one of them said, "Ain't it too bad we lost the war?" And I wasn't quite sure if I agreed with that. But I didn't say anything. The next year I moved to Connecticut and they beat me up because I talked funny. Southern. What's the South? I didn't know. So I've been reading Faulkner ever since to try to figure it out, and other things. That is, these three political cultures are big and very important. Texas has got a big chunk of the West. They've got cowboys as well as the South, and it's a fascinating place. They invited me to come down, teach there, join the faculty. I mean, I was interested. Not so. I didn't accept, but I've always. I mean, understanding the South as part of the U.S., and especially in Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and Chicago, very few of the students are. Let me say, when you are from the South. That is, I've asked people each time I ask in class, is anybody from the South? So tell us a little more about your that is. I'll just say what I've said. Tell us a little more about your take and why do you how have you lived there all your life? Are you a real Southerner? You're a Texan?
Yeah, so I wasn't actually born in Dallas, but I moved to Dallas. I was born in Mesquite, which is much smaller, and then moved to Dallas. It's not too far. I would say it's not too different than the Midwest in some ways, and very different in other ways. Like where I grew up, was very conservative.
But conservative meaning what specifically? Is that
Conservative that a lot of the people that I was raised around and like what you're taught in school is very like it teaches you like a unique set of principles. Like religion is very important, family is very important, hierarchy is something you mentioned is very important, respect is very important. And then also just politically.
Okay, great.
And then like I've driven through like the deep south, so like places much different than Dallas, like Mobile, Alabama, or like Pelahatchie, Mississippi. And it's very kind of eerie. Like there's a lot of like history there, and it's actually very beautiful. Like you look around and you're like, wow, it's actually a beautiful part of the country. But you get to see, I think, in some cases, like some of the best parts of America, and also some really kind of tragic history of America.
This is perfect. You're articulate, and you've got a very distinctive set of answers that I bet none of you have grown up with. So this is important. We want to try to articulate that as part of the U.S., especially as we've got this presidential debate going on right now, and it links with many of those issues. So it's great. Thank you for saying that. And anything else anyone wants to add? Anything on the side? Anyone, you want to add anything on Dublin beyond the book?
I mean, I don't think Dublin's particularly like super interesting, but that's probably just because I live there.
No, just a
forever.
little louder, please.
I don't think Dublin's like massively interesting since I've kind of lived there my entire life. But like, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think of anything I can say about it. I mean, one thing, I had a lecturer on Irish literature, and he said that Dublin as a city, it's not very visibly cultural, but
It's got one day in Dublin.
yeah.
Fat book in one day in Dublin.
Yeah, Bloomsday, yeah, and it is celebrated in Dublin, but yeah, it's not very visibly cultural. Like it's not like you go to Paris and everything is absolutely stunning and beautiful and the architecture is amazing. Dublin can be a little bit ugly sometimes, but I think a lot of the culture is kind of contained within the people and within the history and within the like literary culture and music culture. It's a very it's full of like lots of creative people.
Which ethnic group is the most important set of immigrants from Europe in defining the political leadership of American cities? German, Italian, Greek, Polish? No. What are the names of mayors, the top city council members, and so forth for the last 50 years in Chicago? Irish Catholic.
Yeah.
Irish Catholics are major players in the U.S.
You know, we
And
have
so
a lot of
that, I didn't know this when I came to Chicago. And so I work with people here, and I published a paper called The Irish Ethic and the Spirit of Patronage. Gives you a little bit of the clue, but it's tricky stuff. There were groups that wrote in New York and Boston wrote, so this young author, president or sent it to the president of the University of Chicago, fire this guy. He's irresponsible. So there's a big battle going on. So Daniel Patrick Moynihan knew about this battle, so he, both in New York and Boston. See, he was resigning to leave Harvard and to be full-time senator from the state of New York. And so he invited me to the last class he taught at Harvard to celebrate the Irish. So the conflicts among how to interpret the Irish within American cities are fighting among each other right now. And it's related to the presidential debates. Those are some of the same issues, and they relate as well to the South. That is part of that you didn't mention per se, you mentioned hierarchy, but patronage and personalistic relationships are more part of traditional political culture in the South and with the Irish Catholic style of Chicago. But the individual mayors, in our book called City Money, we have four mayors. One is in Boston, traditional Democrat. San Diego, traditional Republican. Pittsburgh was all three were Irish. Pittsburgh invented what we call basically the new political culture. Fiscally conservative, socially liberal, populist, anti-corruption. Even though he went to Notre Dame himself, and he was part of the traditional machine growing up, and when he ran for mayor, he completely reversed. He had a whole new brochure, and he changed the politics, and that in turn has spread with Bill Clinton, with Tony Blair. So these are fighting international. So I'll end it there, just to give you a flavor of how these things are actively being discussed, but we'll try to give you some pieces of this as we proceed. So, see you on Wednesday. Or you don't need to be here. But send us comments, send us suggestions, and use and link this to your own experiences, and help them connect, like Dallas, as we heard. Okay, thank you, folks.